Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jan Richards, and along with my colleague, Gail Bouchard, we're going to act as MCs this evening. We are members of the book club committee for Together Women Rise, and we're gathered here today so that we can have a conversation with Irene Butter. We're using a webinar format tonight, and we really would like for you to understand that we would encourage you to interact with one another through the chat, but you won't see one another, nor will you hear one another. If you have a question, or if you'd like to say hello and tell us where you're from, you can put that in the chat. And then further on in our evening together, there will be audience Q&A, and you can put that in the chat. And we will share those questions and have a conversation that goes maybe a little more in depth with Irene. We're a powerful community here at Together Women Rise of women and allies dedicated to achieving global gender equality. We have hundreds of local chapters across the US where members learn about gender equality issues, give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries, and build community in large, meaningful connections with each other and with women and girls around the world. Our book club is another way that we can get together and engage with our mission, learn about global gender equality issues, and experience community with others who care about making the world a better place. For more information on us, we would encourage you to go to our website, togetherwomenrise.org. Gail, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the program this evening?
Yes, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Chris Holloway. And tonight we're very pleased to host a special conversation with Irene Butter, a well-known peace activist and Holocaust survivor. Irene is also the author of Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, a memoir of her experiences before, during, and after the Holocaust. While we have encouraged everyone to read Irene's book, it was not a requirement for tonight, and we will not be having our usual breakout groups to discuss the book. If you have not yet read the book, I'm sure you will be inspired to do so by the end of this evening. Instead of a traditional book discussion, we are honored to have Irene in conversation with Chris Holloway, one of the co-authors of Shores Beyond Shores. Chris may be familiar to some of you, as she is the author of Monique and the Mango Rains, 2 years with a midwife in Mali, which was featured as a Together Women Rise Big Read last February. It was Chris that suggested we invite Irene to speak with our Together Women Rise community, and we want to thank her and Irene's publicist, Mary Bisbee Beek, for helping to make this event possible. I'm now going to turn it over to Chris Holloway, who will introduce Irene and begin tonight's special conversation. Irene has graciously offered to answer your own questions at after Chris's interview is done. Please put your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Wendy and Jan and Barb, for inviting me here. It's really, really lovely to be here. My favorite role, I think, is introducing Irene and talking with her. So let me tell you a little more about her and how I know her. And then we've got some questions to ask, and then really looking forward to hearing your questions. So Irene Butter was born Irene Hassenberg and fondly known as Rini, and she was born in Berlin in 1930. She grew up as a happy Jewish child in Nazi-occupied Europe. She is a survivor of 2 concentration camps, Westerbork and Bergen-Belsen, and also a displaced persons camp in Algeria. She arrived on the shores of our country in 1945. went to City College in New York, grew up in New York City, got her PhD in economics from Duke University back in the 60s, people. That was something. And is a professor emerita at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. She's the co-founder of the Raoul Wallenberg Medal and Lecture Series at the University of Michigan, and one of the founders of Zaytuna, an Arab Jewish women's dialogue group in Ann Arbor. Shores Beyond Shores is her memoir and her first book, published in 2018. It was a finalist for a National Jewish Book Award, is translated into Dutch, Portuguese, Czech, British English, and soon German. So how do I get in the lucky position of sitting here with Irene? I first met her in the, hang on, gotta change my screen there. In the fall of 1993, she was my graduate school advisor at the University of Michigan. And when I gave birth to our first son, Aiden, in 1994, I was ironically the only nursing mother in my maternal and child health program. It was really hard to balance high-powered graduate school, work at Planned Parenthood, and motherhood. And Irene was the one professor who made it easier. I would not have finished my degree without her, my MPH. And I distinctly remember her guarding a public bathroom in a health department we were working in when I needed to plug in my nursing pump right near the door. We became really close. And during one of my first visits to her home, I noticed photographs on the wall of Irene and the Dalai Lama, Irene and Elie Wiesel, and other peacemakers. And it was then that she began to tell us her story, my husband and I was dumbstruck. Like, how could this petite, bright bundle of energy and joy have experienced such horror? And I and my husband, John, have been listening and learning ever since. In 2013, we settled on writing this book together. And it's really a product of our friendship and that iterative journey. It has been one of my life's greatest blessings to bear witness to her story and to write with her. The central theme of Irene's story centers on how she chose to be a survivor and not a victim. And she shows us how it's possible to keep hope alive after surviving trauma, and how we can not only keep our own humanity under horrific conditions, but also stand up for others who are at risk of losing their humanity. So Irene, first question for you. You arrived in the United States in 1945, but started talking about your experience 40 years later. What changed?
Well, first of all, upon arrival in New York, when my relatives, my mother's cousins, picked me up because I came alone at Grand Central Station in New York and took me to their apartment in the Bronx, they said to me, now you have finally arrived here. You must forget about the past and never speak about it again. And I am sure they were well-intentioned, but during the first few years here in America, it was painful that nobody was willing to listen. And this is something I've heard from many survivors. Upon arrival, no one would listen. So what took 40 years to break this silence? Well, first of all, I was invited to an Anne Frank panel when an Anne Frank exhibition traveled through the United States in the late 1980s. And when I was preparing for participation in this panel, it suddenly occurred to me that Anna wasn't here. Her voice was silenced forever. We had a diary, but she couldn't speak. And here was I, given the gift of survival, and I was able to speak. And after that experience of participating on the panel, it opened something in me, and it taught me that I needed to break the silence. Now, what also happened was that my daughter, then Pamela, before she changed her name to Ella, she was in middle school and she was taking a course in public speaking. And one day before her speech was to be a 1-hour speech, she came home and she said, well, I have to mention the title. The title of her speech was Anti-Semitism, Hitler's Conquest of Europe and the Concentration Camps. And she said, Mom, will you be my visual aid? And how could I refuse, even though I was petrified before going to class and facing all these middle school students? And what would it be like? How would they behave? Would they laugh at me? Would they fall asleep? Would they make funny faces? I had no idea, but luckily it went well. And after that experience of speaking in her middle school class, since then I've never stopped. And so that's more than 35 years ago.
Oh, that's amazing. And, I wonder, because you started speaking with children, and when you were writing the book, it was so critical that we captured the voice of the child. And people have really said they love that about the book, that it's quite hopeful. And you speak to thousands of people around the world, but really in particular, your story resonates with youth. And yet only 18 states require teaching about the Holocaust. That means 32 states, K through 12, you can be educated and never know about the Holocaust. So can you speak to us, as probably many mothers on this call, about the importance of your story to youth and maybe share some of their responses?
Yes, I'll be glad to. Well, I had read a number of memoirs of Holocaust survivors. All of them had been children and they were writing their books as adults. And this is how it read. It was an adult telling the story in the present time, but not really looking backward to being the child that was undergoing these experiences. And so it reminded me of what it was like for me as a child. What did I see? What did I hear? What did I understand? And what did I feel? And I thought it was important to tell my story, reviving that voice rather than speaking about it so many years later, and being an adult when writing it. And it's really been an effective medium because I think that especially youth connects with me because I was the age they are now when I speak in middle school and high school. And they identify with me because of that age parallel. They want to stand in my shoes. And because I tell my story, they tell me their stories. And this is what I really appreciate, the connection with the students when they tell me their stories. Because I always ask the teacher when I go to a school and to have the students send something to me afterwards. It could be a painting, a drawing, it could be a verse, it could be a letter, whatever they want to send me. And on my website, I have collected a lot of the artwork, but they're also letters. And what they tell me is that they have their own traumas. And I think that's why they understand my story. Either it's the divorce of parents. It might be the loss of a grandparent that they weren't able to say goodbye to. It might be because the color of their skin is different and they get bullied in school. It might be I'm homeless and I had to move 7 times this year and give up my dog. Or it might be my father's in prison. And sometimes I have received letters from students that are sealed. They are sealed because the students don't want the teacher to see what they have written to me. And in several instances, that has been that they are LGBTQ and that they suffer from bullying every day that they come to school. And then they ask me to be in touch. They want to be Facebook friends. So it has been a very moving experience, and it still is. And I enjoy talking to adults in museums and libraries and other places, but most meaningful to me is this connection that I'm able to develop with the students.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And it's true, some of the really beautiful drawings and poems are on irenebutter.com, just so you know, if you really want to look at them. So can you connect with people really easily, and sort of the worst that humanity was done to you, and yet you maintained your sense of humanity. Can you talk about the power of taking care of others, and what we can learn from that today?
Sure. Well, the one first memory that comes up is that in my barrack, the barrack I lived in Bergen-Belsen, there was a woman, and she was quite small and short, and her name was Vogeltje, which means little bird in Dutch, and that's what everyone called her. And just like a little bird, she hopped around through the barrack. She looked for a way of helping somebody. When it was a crying child, she would try to sing a song, or she would hug that baby. Or if it's an adult, she would see what they needed and could she make them more comfortable. And she would sing songs. And I thought of all the people around me that I see who are so mean and are so cruel to others and steal and yell and fight. This is the person I wanted to be. And so it led me to the situation where my parents, their health was deteriorating very rapidly. My mother became ill and bedridden, and she wasn't able to get up for for months. And so I had to feed her and take care of her in every way. And then my father became sick as well. He developed pneumonia and never really recovered from it. And of course, my greatest worry was to lose my parents and be an orphan. And so I think when you're living under such drastic circumstances, what is needed is a purpose to stay alive, a purpose to not give up. And taking care of someone else is that purpose and gives that gratification that kept me going.
Mm-hmm. There's also the scene with a little boy in the displaced persons camp after the war, where you were able to really take care of him when he indeed was an orphan.
Yes, and a few times when I've been in schools where students have read the book, they ask me, did I ever find Vitek again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They pick up on that story.
Right. That's very true. And you talk about, you've told me that Bergen-Belsen is a very special and sacred place. You've gone back to there with your children and grandchildren. And at first, this was very hard for me to understand why you would want to go back, because it seems like it would only hold horror. So can you talk a little bit about why this is such a special place for you and how you created that meaning?
Well, I really never thought I would go back to Bergen-Belsen, but then we had a family reunion, and our children, I have two, and my brother also has two children, they ganged up on us. They wanted us to take them on a tour to the sites of family history. And my brother immediately said that was impossible. He could never do that. And it kind of shocked me because I had never anticipated doing this. But we gave it some thought, and we decided if they want to go, if we don't take them, who would? So we made this trip, and we went to all the places on the way to Bergen-Belsen was the pivotal site to be. And then when we arrived there and realized that we were taking our children and then the subsequent time, our grandchildren, to a place where we were supposed to die, that was a triumph over tragedy. And it meant so much to our children and even our grandchildren that I never regretted making that trip. And actually, I was supposed to go back to Bergen-Belsen in 2020 because it was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. And there was a special ceremony, and I was invited to be a speaker. And I was really looking forward to it with Chris and John and Mary. But it was canceled. The pandemic swallowed it. And maybe it will be rescheduled next year or in 2022. And if it is, I would welcome going back once more.
Well, suffice it to say, I would too. Let's hope it happens. So another question for you, you started out in Berlin, and then your father went to the Netherlands, and he thought that was far enough to get away from the Nazis. And of course, we know now that that was not far enough. And 100,000 Jews were deported from the Netherlands from 1942 to 1944 during the war, and fewer than 5,000 survived. And yet you are one of them. And you've said, and obviously Anne Frank, who you knew and your brother went to school with, did not survive. And you've said you feel a special responsibility to help others and live a good life because you survived. And yet that survivor's guilt can also be devastating. So how have you dealt with this, and how have you used it for good?
Yeah, honestly, I've never felt guilt about surviving. I look at it as a gift. And because I received this amazing, gigantic gift, I felt that I had to make something special out of my life because it was a debt. I wouldn't call it guilt, but it was a debt that I should do something special to clear that debt. And so I became very interested in peace projects and fighting for justice and to end discrimination, to fight for civil rights, and appreciate the American values and hoping to sustain them.
Yes. And you do talk a lot about the United States being a land of opportunity when you landed here as a refugee, not knowing English or very little English. You'd learn Dutch, you learn French, a little English. Can you talk a little bit about what that has meant to you as a refugee landing on our shores?
Yes, I still am tremendously appreciative because when I arrived in this country, and my mother and my brother also survived Bergen-Belsen, we were penniless. We were not only penniless, we were homeless. Everything had been taken away from us by the Nazis. And we were stateless because Hitler deprived all Jews of citizenship. So we didn't have any citizenship. And it's called statelessness. And it's the worst status you can imagine, because when you're stateless, there isn't any country in the world that should or is willing to accept you, to let you in. And so the first thing, of course, in my mind was to become an American citizen and to apply for that as soon as possible. But given that we were penniless, how would I have been able to get a college education in this time, the present time? I went to a tuition-free New York City college for 4 years. And my brother and I were able to find jobs at that time, right after the war. There were plenty of jobs. He worked during the day and went to high school at night and college. And I went to college, well, first high school and then college, and had after school jobs, all kinds of jobs in a bakery, department store, babysitting for 35 cents an hour. There were many ways of all of us earning money to pay the bills and start a new life. And then I went to graduate school, and that too was practically free because I had student assistantships where you work for a professor, and that was my graduate education. And that's where I met my husband at Duke University. And after we both got our PhD, we spent 3 years in Washington, D.C. He had a postdoctoral fellowship, and I worked for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System until we came to the University of Michigan. And we both got jobs at the university. So all these opportunities bundled together enriched my life tremendously. And I just wish that refugees who come to this country today would have the same opportunities so that they could lead the life as richly as I did.
Mm. And that's a nice segue into letting these folks know you co-founded this wonderful group called Zaytuna, this Arab Jewish dialogue group that works towards a just peace in the Middle East through engaging in listening and in dialogue. And it's very important to you. Your daughter lives there, your granddaughter and your grandchildren. And you deeply believe, and I respect this so much in you, that peace will be achieved when we see the other in ourselves. And given the deep divides in our own country today, how could this type of experience help heal those divides?
Well, everyone could found a group like we did, a dialogue group, and that's what we do. We talk about complicated subjects. But before we even got to that topic, we spent more than 1 year just listening to each other's narratives. And that was the way to create safety and trust, and to find out that if there were differences between us, they were overshadowed by far by our commonalities, by our humanity, by our values. And the motto of Zaytuna is refusing to be enemies. And this is what we try to practice, that we're open to the other. We don't judge other people, even if others say they are our enemies, because you can't really assess a person until you have looked into their eyes and have listened to their stories. And if you're willing to do that, you will make many more friends, and have many more enriching experiences and finding love rather than hate.
And refusing to be enemies is, they can find that online, right?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to learn about how to create dialogue and use the film to do it, that's
Yes, there is a documentary by that title.
nice. Oh, I think somebody put Zaytuna in the chat here. That's great. So I'm aware that I have one more question because we're starting to be at time and there are so many people who want to ask you things. So if there was one thing you want us to take away from tonight, your one takeaway, what would it be?
Well, my main message is never be a bystander, because it became clear to me that Hitler wanted to eliminate all Jews from this planet. And then there were many perpetrators who helped do this. But there were also many people who did not adopt the racist ideology that Nazism was based on. And those were the bystanders. They didn't agree, they didn't share the values, but they didn't do anything to prevent it. And so if we want to prevent injustice, bias, prejudice, discrimination, then we need to have a social conscience and interrupt those actions that would lead in that direction. And so everybody can make a difference if you don't turn your back when you see something that you feel is wrong, but take a stand and interrupt, intervene. There may be many other people who agree with you, but there has to be a first one before the opposition or the disagreement is articulated, and then it can move from there. And so it can be practiced in small ways, like bullying in schools. I hear so much about bullying in schools. So if one student sees that somebody else is bullied, they shouldn't walk away, but they should call for help, or they should confront the bullier, or they should make friends with the child that's being bullied. Nobody wants to be bullied, but some people are the bulliers, and they should be dealt with, and there should be justice and peace. So I think that is the important lesson. And young people really respond to this. The letters I get say, we don't want to be bystanders, we want to be rescuers. And I used to turn my back, but I won't do that in the future. And some people say, our generation has the responsibility to eradicate genocide from this planet. So that's a pretty important goal. But
that's great. Go for it, right? Go big.
I'd go big, but every little thing counts as well. Everything we do matters.
Thank you, Irene. And I think, Wendy, am I handing it over to you to ask the audience questions?
Yes, I would encourage anyone who has questions to put them in the chat. I'll try to follow along. There's lots of discussion going on in the chat, and lots of great comments and appreciation for you, Irene. A couple of questions have come in. Our first one came from Connie. Your poetry book meant a lot to you and inspired you. Were you ever able to locate that book?
Yes, I do have it. It was hidden by, we had given it to a neighbor of ours, and she kept it and gave it back to me during the war. And it's a big treasure to me now.
That's great. All right, a couple of people have asked about your father's name. They were surprised that he had an English name, and John, and why was that? And how was it pronounced?
John was pronounced just like that, and
Just
it's
like that.
and it's a fairly common name in Germany, in Holland. It's not unusual.
All right. Several people are also interested in your connection with Anne Frank. Can you speak at all about being in the same camp with her and your connection with her?
Yes, I did know her because we lived in the same neighborhood. I didn't know her well. Our families were not connected in any way. I used to hear stories about her because a friend of mine was in Anna's class, and she was very visible, very popular, and very energetic. And I think I heard she was often naughty. So other kids knew about her. And then her family went into hiding. Anybody who read the diary would know about that phase. But then they were betrayed and they were deported to Auschwitz. And her mother died in Auschwitz, but she and her sister Margot were sent to Bergen-Belsen, the camp where I was, because Auschwitz was liquidated late in the war. So in the fall of 1944, they came to Bergen-Belsen. They lived we were separated by a barbed wire from the Auschwitz women. But one day, my friend Hannelie, who had been a very close friend of Anne Frank before the war, and she and I lived in the same barrack in Bergen-Belsen, she discovered that Anna was in that camp and asked somebody to bring her to the fence. Of course, it had to be nighttime because during the day, if the guards would see anybody close to that fence, they would shoot. So in the dark, she got somebody to bring Anna, and she was very pale and very skinny, and she didn't have any clothing, just a gray blanket wrapped around her. And she asked Hannelie if she could find some clothing, and then they would meet the next evening and throw the clothing over the fence. And then Hannelie told me and asked me to come with her. We both had collected clothing. They were old and tattered, but better than not having any at all. And we threw the bundle over the fence, and somebody came over. Somebody ran, picked up the bundle, and took off with it. And so that's the only time I saw her, for a few minutes that night. And then pretty soon after that, my family was included in a prisoner exchange and left Bergen-Belsen. But her sister, Margaret, was so sick she couldn't even come with Anna to the fence. And Anna herself was so skinny and so emaciated and pale that I don't think she lived much longer than the time when I saw her. And the irony is that in Anna's family, the only person who survived was the father. And in my family, the one that didn't survive was my father.
We have another question. Wondering what your feelings are today when you meet people from Germany. Do you feel any different than you would about meeting people from other places?
Well, I did for a long time. I had a strong dislike for the German language. And if I heard people speak German, I turned my back and walked away from it. And even though my own family, it was my mother's mother tongue, so she spoke it increasingly as she got older. She turned back to her first language. But then something happened that years later, I was in Germany. My father is buried in a Jewish cemetery in a small town in southern Germany. And I have been back to the cemetery a number of times and made some friends in the town. And I was invited to speak to the high school there. And I was asked to give my talk in German. And I said I wouldn't be able to do it because I had distanced myself from the language for many, many years. And then when it came time to give my talk, kind of unintentionally, unknowingly, I gave the entire speech in German. And so somehow I came full circle with that experience. And since then, I've made peace with the language. And I've been back to Germany, and I can hear it now. I don't mind speaking it.
Given what you have experienced and learned in seeing the conflicts currently overwhelming our world, how do you maintain hope?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And the short answer is you have to maintain hope, because if you give up hope, there's nothing left. And you do what you can. And we all have opportunities to contribute to peace by helping the people who are neglected, whose voices are not heard, by helping uneducated women receive their education, by stamping out hatred in our own environment whenever we see it. And as I said before, there are small ways and there are larger ways, but everything we do matters sooner or later, and we cannot and should not give up.
That's a wonderful answer. Do you ever worry that what happened in Europe with Hitler could happen here in the US?
I do. I have been worrying for the last 6 years, I would say. And it gives me nightmares to see what's going on at our borders, where children are separated from their parents and put in cages. And some of the immigrants are called animals and labeled other terrible ways. It's very frightening. And I think more than ever, we all have to accept a responsibility to do whatever we can to sustain our democratic values, because they're very fragile, more fragile than ever before. And unless we all do our utmost to sustain them, then we may just lose and end up with an authoritarian government.
So Vicki is asking if you have any suggestions for how to overcome some of the divides we now have in the US, such as anti-science, anti-expert proponents, especially given your expertise in public health.
Yes, well, I think we need to talk to people who have this misinformation, and often they don't even understand what they're supporting. It's difficult, but it shouldn't be a barrier to confront and have conversations with people who I think they're captured. I don't know how, I don't know why, but they're captured into a regime and into a society that is full of hatred and violence, and doesn't recognize each and every one of us and our values. So yes, we need to talk to people. We can form groups, dialogue groups, There are many things we can do. We can write letters to our representatives. We can sign petitions. We can write letters. There are many, many actions we can take. I mean, we're bombarded on our internet sites every day, and it takes time, it takes effort, but we can't afford not to act and be as active as possible.
Thank you. Karen is asking, we understand that you feel that your survivorship is a gift and a debt, but how have you personally dealt with the trauma of your experiences?
Well, over time, takes a long time to deal with trauma. I've never been in therapy, but I have had opportunities to mourn and to talk to other people about it, to share it with other survivors, and to just work on it myself, to process it, and to discover that while I was a victim those years, that shouldn't frame the rest of my life. It's much more powerful to be and to act as a survivor, which allows you to take many actions and try to build a better world.
Thank you. We have a question about why you gave your book the title that you, why did you choose the title for your book?
Well, it was a long journey, and we had to pass many shores, from shore to shore. It just seemed, it felt like the right title. We had many other titles that we considered, and in the end, that was most descriptive of a journey. It's really the book about a journey.
Great. How did you, we understand that when you arrived in the US, you didn't speak much English. How did you learn English to the point that you were able to successfully complete high school and college? And what advice would you give modern day immigrants to the US?
To learn it as fast as possible as you can. I arrived in Christmas Day in America, and early January, just a couple of weeks later, I was in school, and I was yearning for school because I hadn't had any schooling for more than 3 years. I learned a little bit of English in the refugee camp in Algiers in preparation for coming to America, but it was very little. And my relatives helped me by speaking English all the time. And also my classmates were very helpful. They didn't exclude me from anything. I didn't feel that I was treated differently as a refugee. I was invited to parties in school, and you just concentrate on learning.
Good suggestion. How was your health when you came out of the camps? Did you, we read a lot about your mother and your brother, being quite ill, but how was your health? And how old were you when you were rescued?
I was 14. I had just turned 14 when we left the concentration camp. My mother and I had the same weight. We weighed 70 pounds. And I was pretty healthy, I guess, because then in Algiers, in the refugee camp, where we were fed well, I started gaining weight. And in a letter that I wrote to my mother from the camp, I said that I needed to go on a diet.
All right, next question is your brother still alive?
No, unfortunately, he died 7 years ago.
Sorry to hear that. All right, we are just about out of time. I've got a couple more questions here to give you. Sylvia would like to know, you were fortunate to have had such a loving family and you were able to stay together until the loss of your father. Do you think that that gave you strength to endure and move forward, that maybe those your age who didn't have that support may not have had?
Definitely. I think being with my family meant everything and gave me the strength and the resilience to keep going.
Yep, love of a family will do that. Were there any events, or was there any one event that gave you an understanding of the dangers of what was happening to the Jews? Or was it the change gradual? Today we have instant access to news of the world. How did you know what was going on to Jews during the war?
We knew it was very limited. In the concentration camp, there was no radio and we didn't get any newspapers. Once in a while, one of the Nazis gave somebody a newspaper, but very rarely. So our understanding of what went on in 43 and 44 was very limited. We were just waiting for the war to end, not having any idea of how close we would be.
And before you actually went to the camps, you know, what were you seeing in terms of, you know, the dangers that were there? I mean, were they evident to you? Were you, as a young child, were you concerned, scared, worried, or you know, was that just not really that evident?
Well, once the deportation started, we knew what was happening. We knew what the different camps were about. And when we were in Westerbork, the first concentration camp, which was a transit camp, we knew that in Auschwitz there were gas chambers. So it was very scary. And every day was scary. Every moment was scary. You never knew what would happen. Somebody could come into the barrack and beat you.
Last question that I have in the chat, and I want you to know that I'm going to share with you this entire chat because it is just full of comments about how people have enjoyed the conversation tonight and how inspiring it has been, and I want you to have that. The last question that is in the chat that I see is, are you concerned at all about growing anti-Semitism in the US today?
Of course, how could one not be? It's been a rising trend here and in other parts of the world, and it's very scary. And I was pleased to see that President Biden has appointed I don't know if it's called an ambassador or a special person in the government to keep track of the situation and to try to curb it wherever possible. And so that's a sign of hope, but it is very frightening to see how other forces in our country are certainly encouraging it.
Yeah. That is the end of the questions in our chat. Jan, I'll turn it back over to you. Or Gail? Yes, Gail, I'm terribly sorry.
I believe that Barb has something to say.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah, I would like to introduce Barb Collins, and myself personally would also like to thank Irene and Chris. Now, Barb Collins, she's the co-founder of Together Women Rise and a member of our board of directors. She's also the author of Love Norm, it's about Dr. Norman Fintel, on Equality and Courage in a World Calling for Change, which was published in 2019. Do Something Good, which also embraces the vision and mission of Together Women Rise. Thank you, Barbara.
Hello, everyone. Irene, I'm kind of speechless. I'm so grateful to be here tonight and to be able to listen to your remarkable story. It's an important message for the world right now, and it really resonates with us, as you can see in the record number attending this evening. I don't think any book club has seen this kind of number in our history. So over the last 18 years history of Together Women Rise, there have been some standout moments of what I like to call strategic serendipity. Like being here tonight with Irene and Chris, both of you, is one of those strategic moments when I feel our paths were destined to cross for a reason. Now, some of our longtime members may remember way back in 2008, when Together Women Rise only had about 50 chapters. And we gave a $14,000 grant to Clinique Monique to help mothers and babies living in impoverished villages in Mali. And this was the year after Chris published her book, Monique and the Mango Rains, that came to our attention. And Together Women Rise fell in love with what Clinique Monique did and their mission. So now we jump forward to 2020 when Chris's book was selected for our Big Read Book Club. And then here tonight again, our paths are crossing with Irene, who has inspired us to live to serve and to keep doing what's right. Irene, you remind us not to be silent and not to be those bystanders. And I really believe that this is exactly what Together Women Rise members are all about. You know, you just inspire us, Irene, to keep hope alive and to keep trying to build that better world. And as you've done in your lifetime, we too believe in the power of one person to be able to change the world because we do it together. So we really want to help you carry on your vision for the world. And we share your commitment to getting your message into the hands of the younger generations. We know that our youth are energized and ready to lead us into the future. So to help do this, I'd like to ask everyone here tonight to help spread Irene's message. There's several ways we can do that. The first is to have each of us donate a copy of Irene's book to middle schools and high schools and libraries in your local communities. Irene has a team that can help identify the schools. They can offer significant discounts for the sales if they buy multiple copies. They can also provide a teacher's guide, and they would handle all the shipping of the books to the school or library. So Wendy is going to put that contact information in the chat box. Another way we can help is what Chris mentioned earlier, to support the Raoul Wallenberg Award and the organization that Irene helped co-found called Zetona. I hope I got that right. And Wendy will also put information about this in the chat box. And the last way we can help is to put Irene's book into the hands of our own children and our grandchildren and maybe our great-grandchildren. So Irene, we want to help you, and we thank you for inspiring us and making tonight an incredibly special night. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for listening, for showing up, for speaking up, and for taking action to help other people. So good night, everyone, and thanks for being with us.
Just
Good night.
before we leave, I have a couple of things I'd like to remind folks about if we could. We do appreciate so much time that Irene has given to us and the inspiration that she has provided. There's folks from all over the country, and I did notice a hello in the chat from London. So we have worldwide visitors here this evening. But we'd like to remind you about some future things that are coming up at Together Women Rise. On September 2nd, we'll have our regular monthly webinar, and we'll discuss projects that we're featuring in September. If you join us, you'll learn about One Village Partners in Sierra Leone and the Community Cloud Forest Conservation in Guatemala. Those monthly webinars on the first Thursday of the month are a great way to learn more about Together Women Rise and our important work toward achieving global gender equality. And we would hope that you would visit us and see what that's all about. We have a couple more book club sessions scheduled. September 9th, we're going to be discussing the bestseller Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. On November 3rd, there will be a book club discussion on Standing in the Way, From Trafficking Victim to Human Rights Activist by Ajali Tamang and Sarah Simmons, who is the founder, by the way, of one of the RISE grantees, Her Future Coalition. All of these events are in the website under the Join Us tab. And our website's an easy one, togetherwomenrise.org. And if you are interested in following our general book club information, join Goodreads if you're not already a member. And if you are, join the group Together Women Rise. You will see many, many, many book suggestions, not just the ones that we've discussed in our book club sessions. And you'll be able to follow along and see what your friends, neighbors, other members of Together Women Rise think about these books. Again, we thank all of you for being here and hope that we'll see you again at another session. Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Night,
you.
Irene.
Night. Thank you. Thank you, Irene. It's wonderful.
Thank
Good night.
you. Wonderful
Thank
to
you.
be.
Thank you so very much to all of you for participating in this really special event. We had up to about 300 people on tonight listening to the message, and we are going to follow up with everyone who registered to provide them with the recording and information on how they can purchase the book and donate it to a local library. Thank you very, very much. All the best to you. And Chris, so nice to have you participating. You are, I mean, I think you're an honorary volunteer leader now or something. I mean, we're going to have to give you a title with Together Women Rise.
I'm the lucky one that gets to tell other fabulous women's stories. So I have
Isn't that fun?
the best, actually. So thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Irene, what a wonderful evening. And you absolutely have to read these comments in the chat. I think many of your friends were here tonight and we're making comments. So I'll email that to you shortly after we finish.
Thank you. It was a joy
Yeah.
to be here. And thank you, Chris. There couldn't be a better interviewer than you.
Aww.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Night.
Night.
Thank you both.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.